stroke volume variation and pulse pressure variation are high, because of this, we know that administration of a fluid bolus will increase stroke volume. EaDyn is raised. Remember that EaDyn is the pulse pressure variation divided by the stroke volume variation. A raised EaDyn means that a patient will increase their mean arterial pressure to a fluid bolus if they are preload responsive. For EaDyn to predict a rise in mean arterial pressure, the patient must be preload responsive. Pressure cannot be increased with fluid unless that fluid leads to an increase in stroke volume. The patient is currently hypotensive, as defined by a mean arterial pressure below 65 mm of mercury. As the elevated stroke volume variation suggests, the patient will be fluid responsive, and the raised EaDyn suggests they will also be pressure responsive. A fluid bolus will increase both stroke volume and mean arterial pressure. A fluid bolus of 500 ml of lactated Ringer solution is set up and delivered to the patient. The patient is seen to be a preload responder, as the fluid bolus results in an increased stroke volume and hence flow. This in turn increases cardiac output. The increased volume ejected into the large vessels is not able to distend the arteries very much, as they have a high elastance or low compliance and are hard to stretch. This increase in volume generates an increase in pressure in this situation. We can think of this as similar to adding extra volume into a rigid pipe full of water, which cannot distend, and the extra volume generates an increase in pressure. The increased stroke volume ejected into the stiff or highly elastic large vessels causes an increase in pressure. Mean arterial pressure therefore increases in response to the fluid bolus that has increased stroke volume, and the patient is no longer hypotensive. Because of the increase in pressure due to the fluid bolus, the patient is no longer preload responsive, and both stroke volume variation and pulse pressure variation have dropped to reflect this. A raised EaDyn tells us that if the patient is preload responsive, the administration of a fluid bolus will increase both stroke volume and mean arterial pressure. The patient is preload responsive and hence fluid responsive, as indicated by the high stroke volume variation and pulse pressure variation. Because of this, we know that administration of a fluid bolus will increase stroke volume. EaDyn is low. A low EaDyn means that the patient will not increase their mean arterial pressure to a fluid bolus, even if they are preload responsive. The patient is currently hypotensive, as defined by a mean arterial pressure below 65 mm of mercury. As the patient is preload responsive, indicated by a raised stroke volume variation, a fluid bolus will increase stroke volume, but it will not increase mean arterial pressure due to the low elastance of the large vessels. A fluid bolus of 500 ml of lactated Ringer solution is set up and delivered to the patient as they are preload responsive. As before, because the patient is a preload responder, the fluid bolus results in an increased stroke volume and hence flow. Cardiac output therefore increases as well. The increased volume ejected into the large vessels distends the arteries easily since they have a low elastance or high compliance and are easy to stretch. This increase in volume does not generate an increase in pressure in this situation because the energy is absorbed by distension of the arteries, generating less pressure. We can think of this as similar to adding extra volume to a balloon that's been blown up many times. Since the balloon is easily distended, the extra volume generates very little increase in pressure. The increased stroke volume ejected into the distendable or low elastance large vessels does not cause an increase in pressure. Therefore, mean arterial pressure does not increase in response to the fluid bolus, even though this has increased stroke volume. As a result of the fluid bolus, the patient is no longer preload responsive, and both stroke volume variation and pulse pressure variation have dropped to reflect this, even though mean arterial pressure has not changed. A low EaDyn tells us that if the patient is preload responsive, the administration of a fluid bolus will increase stroke volume, but will not increase mean arterial pressure.